you're not crazy. But there's a moment, right before you make a decision, where something feels off. It's subtle, almost unnoticeable, like the choice is already moving. Before you've fully decided, you tell yourself you're in control, that you're choosing. But if you slow it down, really slow it down, there's a strange delay, a gap. The thought appears, I should do this. And then, almost instantly, you agree with it. But here's the part that's harder to see. You didn't choose the thought. It arrived, fully formed, and you followed it. You've probably noticed this in small ways. You reach for your phone without deciding to. You open an app without remembering why. You say something in a conversation and only afterward wonder, why did I say that? Or worse, you know what you should do. You've thought about it for days. You've planned it, prepared for it, and then you don't do it. Not because you chose not to, but because something in you moved in a different direction, and you watched it happen. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because the version of you that you believe is in control might not be the one making decisions at all. It just takes credit after the fact. Psychology has a name for this, not in a mystical sense, but in a very precise, almost mechanical way. Your brain generates impulses before you become aware of them. Studies have shown that the signal to act appears milliseconds before you consciously decide to act, which means by the time you feel like you've chosen, the process is already in motion. And your awareness? It's late. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is what you do next. You take ownership. You say, I chose this. This is who I am, even when the decision didn't originate where you think it did. And over time, this creates a quiet distortion. You begin to build an identity around actions you didn't fully control, habits you didn't consciously choose, reactions that feel automatic, but get labeled as you. This is where the illusion becomes dangerous. Because if you believe you are fully in control, then every failure feels personal. Every hesitation feels like weakness. Every contradiction feels like confusion. But something deeper is happening here. There are layers inside you that move faster than thought, older than logic, quieter than awareness, and they're shaping your behavior in real time. You've felt this before. The sudden urge, the unexplained resistance, the emotional reaction that doesn't match the situation. You try to explain it. You try to control it, but it slips because it wasn't created in the part of you that explains things. And this is the part no one tells you. The version of you that says, I am choosing my life, might just be a narrator, not the author. And once you start to see that, you can't unsee it, because now every decision starts to feel different, not free, but revealed. And the question slowly begins to form. If your thoughts arrive before you choose them, if your actions begin before you decide, then what exactly is in control? And more importantly, who is the you that believes it is? You've felt it, but you don't usually name it. That quiet sense that your life is repeating, not in big, dramatic ways, but in small, almost invisible loops. You tell yourself, this time will be different. And for a moment, it is. You act differently. You think more clearly. You feel more in control. But then, slowly, something pulls you back. The same habits, the same reactions, the same decisions, almost like your life is following a script you didn't consciously write. You notice it in patterns. You procrastinate again. You react emotionally again. You choose what's familiar again, even when you know better, even when you've already learned the lesson. And this is the part that confuses you. It doesn't feel like you're choosing to repeat it. It feels like it's happening through you. Psychology has a structure for this. Carl Jung described it as patterns emerging from the unconscious, not random, but organized, predictable, almost like internal programs. You're not just making isolated decisions. You're expressing a pattern, a structure that lives beneath your awareness. It shapes what you notice, what you ignore, what you feel drawn to, what you avoid, and most importantly, what feels like a choice. Because here's what you don't see in the moment. Before you decide anything, your mind has already filtered reality. It has already removed certain options, highlighted others, attached emotion to specific outcomes. So when you finally choose, you're not choosing freely. You're selecting from a pre-edited list. This is why your decisions feel personal, because they fit you. They align with your preferences, your habits, your personality. But that alignment isn't proof of freedom. It's evidence of conditioning. Someone like you, someone who reflects, questions, analyzes, often believes they are more conscious than others, more aware, more in control. But this is where the illusion deepens. Because awareness of your thoughts is not the same as control over them. You can watch the pattern and still follow it. You notice the hesitation and still avoid. You see the impulse and still act. You understand the behavior and still repeat it. This is not failure. This is structure. There's a part of you that operates faster than reflection. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't explain itself. It just moves. And then you arrive afterward to make sense of it. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because the more intelligent you are, the better you become at explaining what you didn't actually choose. You rationalize. You justify. You create clean narratives for messy automatic behaviors. You say, I needed a break. It just didn't feel right. Now wasn't the right time. But beneath those explanations, there's a pattern that never changed. And over time, this creates a subtle split between the version of you that believes it's in control and the deeper system that's actually driving your behavior. This is the archetype, not a character, but a structure, a loop, a psychological pattern that repeats itself through you. And the more you identify with it, the more invisible it becomes. Because now, it doesn't feel like a pattern anymore. It feels like you. But something deeper is happening here. And until you see what's underneath the pattern, you'll keep calling it choice, when it's anything but. There's a moment you rarely notice, not when you act, but right before you don't act. It's quiet, almost nothing. A slight tension in your chest, a subtle resistance in your body, a thought that feels reasonable, but vague. I'll do it later. And just like that, the direction changes. You don't experience this as fear. You experience it as logic, as preference, as a decision. But that's not what it is. Something deeper is happening here. Because your brain isn't designed to give you freedom. It's designed to keep you safe. Every thought that appears in your mind is not neutral. It's filtered, shaped, weighted, based on one priority: Avoid discomfort. So when you think, I don't feel like doing this, what you're actually feeling is resistance. And resistance is not random. It's protective. Your mind is constantly scanning. Will this expose me? Will this create uncertainty? Will this threaten how I see myself? And if the answer is yes, it redirects you, quietly, efficiently, without asking. This is why your decisions feel like yours, because they are aligned with what feels safe, not what is true. And this is the part no one wants to admit. Most of what you call choice is actually avoidance. Avoidance of failure. Avoidance of rejection. Avoidance of uncertainty. Avoidance of confronting something you don't want to see. You don't decide freely. You lean away from discomfort. And your mind is incredibly good at hiding this from you. It doesn't say, you're afraid. It says, this isn't the right time. It doesn't say, you might fail. It says, you need to prepare more. It doesn't say, this will challenge your identity. It says, this just doesn't feel like you. And you believe it, because it sounds like you. But that voice is not neutral. It's strategic. Carl Jung described this as the influence of the unconscious. Not just hidden thoughts, but hidden motivations. Forces that shape your behavior without your awareness. And Nietzsche pushed it further. He suggested that what we call conscious will is often just a surface reflection of deeper drives we don't control, which means you're not deciding first and acting second. You're being moved first and then deciding how to explain it. And this is where it becomes unsettling, because if you pay attention, really pay attention, you'll start to see it. The impulse appears before the justification. The emotion rises before the explanation. The behavior begins before the decision. And your awareness, it arrives in the middle, trying to catch up. This is not a flaw. This is the mechanism. Your brain predicts, reacts, and adjusts. Before you consciously understand what's happening, it generates actions, then hands them to you, as if you chose them, and you accept them, because rejecting them would mean confronting something deeper. It would mean seeing that you are not as in control as you thought. And that's not just uncomfortable, it's destabilizing. Because if your choices are shaped by forces you don't see, then your identity, the person you believe yourself to be, is built on something fragile, something reactive, something conditioned. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because as long as the mechanism stays hidden, you will keep mistaking protection for intention, avoidance for decision, and reaction for identity. But once you start to see it, you realize something you can't ignore. You are not choosing from a blank space. You are choosing from what feels safe. And what feels safe is not always what is true. At first, it doesn't look like a problem. Your life still moves. You make decisions. You respond to situations. You function. From the outside, everything seems normal. But internally, something starts to narrow. You hesitate more. Not in obvious ways, but in small, quiet moments. Moments no one else sees. You think about speaking, and then stay silent. You consider acting, and then delay. You feel something real, and then suppress it. And over time, this creates a pattern of almost doing it, almost saying it, almost becoming something else, but never fully crossing the line. This is the shadow side of the illusion, because when you believe, you are choosing freely. You don't question what's shaping your choices. So the avoidance continues, quietly, consistently, and you adapt to it. You build a life that fits inside your limits, not because you chose those limits, but because they feel natural. You tell yourself, this is just who I am. I'm not the kind of person who does that. I don't want that anyway. But that's not identity. That's adjustment. Adjustment to fear. Adjustment to discomfort. Adjustment to patterns you didn't consciously create. And this is where something begins to erode. Not your life on the surface, but something underneath. Your sense of agency. Your ability to act, despite internal resistance. Your trust in your own decisions. Because if you look closely, you'll notice something unsettling. You don't always believe yourself anymore. You say you'll do something, and then you don't. You set intentions, and then abandon them. You promise change, and then repeat the same pattern. And each time it happens, a small fracture forms, not dramatic, not visible, but real. You begin to doubt. Why can't I follow through? What's wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? But the answer isn't what you think. This is not a lack of discipline. This is not laziness. This is misalignment, a conflict between the part of you that wants to act and the deeper system that is trying to protect you. And when that system wins, you don't experience it as protection. You experience it as failure. So you push harder. You try to control yourself more. You create stricter rules, more plans, more pressure. But the pattern doesn't break. It adapts because the mechanism underneath is still untouched. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because now you start identifying with the outcome. Not just, I failed, but I am someone who fails. Not just, I hesitated, but I am a hesitant person. And slowly, your identity contracts. You become smaller, without realizing it, more predictable, more controlled, more limited. Not because you chose to be, but because you adapted to what felt safe. And the most unsettling part? It feels normal. You don't notice what's missing because you've never experienced yourself outside of the pattern. This is the shadow, not something evil, not something dramatic, but something hidden, something that shapes your life without being seen. And as long as it remains invisible, you will continue to believe. You are choosing your life while slowly becoming someone shaped by what you avoid. And this is the quiet cost of the illusion of free will. Not that you have no control, but that the control you believe you have is not where your life is actually being decided. It didn't start with you. That's the part you don't usually consider. Because when you look at your behavior now, your hesitation, your reactions, your patterns, it feels personal. It feels like you. But if you slow it down, really look at it, you'll notice something strange. These reactions feel old, familiar in a way that doesn't match your current life. You hesitate, even when there's no real risk. You feel judged, even when no one is judging you. You avoid, even when nothing is actually stopping you. And the intensity doesn't match the situation, because it doesn't come from the situation. It comes from memory. Not the kind you consciously recall, but emotional memory. Stored reactions, learned responses. Your nervous system learned, at some point, what is safe, what is dangerous, what gets approval, What leads to rejection? And it learned this early. Before you had language, before you had logic, before you had a clear sense of self. So you adapted, not consciously, but automatically. You learned to stay quiet, to avoid conflict. You learned to perform, to receive validation. You learned to hold back, to prevent rejection. And at the time, this wasn't weakness. This was intelligence. You were aligning yourself with your environment, doing what was necessary to feel safe. But here's what no one tells you. The environment changes, but the pattern stays. So now, you're reacting to a past that no longer exists. Carl Jung referred to this as the formation of the psyche through early experience. Not just shaping your personality, but shaping your perception, your instincts, your automatic responses, which means what feels like a decision in the present is often a reaction from the past, and you don't question it because it feels natural. You don't think, this is conditioning. You think, this is me, and this is where the illusion deepens, because now your identity is built on patterns you didn't consciously choose. Preferences, fears, boundaries, habits, all shaped before you were aware enough to question them. And over time, you reinforce them by repeating them, explaining them, defending them. You say, I've always been like this. But that's not a truth. That's a timeline. Something happened. Something was learned. Something was repeated until it became automatic. And now, it runs in the background, quietly, consistently, shaping what feels possible. This is why certain choices feel easy and others feel impossible. Not because they are, but because they conflict with what your system learned to protect. And this is the part most people avoid. Because if you trace it back, if you really look at where your patterns come from, you're forced to confront something uncomfortable. A large part of who you believe yourself to be was formed without your consent, not chosen, not designed, but absorbed. And that doesn't just challenge your past, it challenges your present. Because now, you have to ask, if these patterns were learned, if these reactions were conditioned, if this identity was constructed, then what part of you is actually choosing? And more importantly, what would be left if those patterns stopped? So what do you do with this? Not the idea, but the realization. Because once you see it, you can't go back to believing your choices are simple. You start noticing things, the hesitation before the excuse, the impulse before the explanation, the emotion before the story you attach to it. And for a moment, there's space, a small gap that wasn't there before. This is where most people misunderstand. They think awareness should immediately lead to control, that once you see the pattern, you should be able to override it. But that's not how it works, because the system underneath is still active, still fast, still protective, still automatic. So the goal is not to eliminate it. You can't. The goal is to stop identifying with it, to see the impulse without immediately becoming it, to notice the thought, avoid this, without instantly obeying it, to feel the resistance without letting it decide for you. And this sounds simple, but this is where it becomes real. Because now, you're not trying to feel different. You're acting while feeling the same. You still feel hesitation. You still feel uncertainty. You still feel the pull to return to what's familiar, but you don't automatically follow it. This is not control. This is separation, a subtle shift between this is me and this is happening in me. And in that shift, something changes. You realize the impulse is not the decision. The feeling is not the action. The thought is not the command. They are signals, not instructions. And for the first time, you're not reacting immediately. You're observing. There's a pause. Not long, but enough. Enough to see the pattern as it's happening, not after. And this is where something new appears. Not freedom in the way you imagined. Not complete control, but responsibility. Because now, you can no longer say, I didn't know. You see the avoidance. You feel the pull. You recognize the pattern as it unfolds. And even if it's difficult, there's a moment where something else becomes possible. Not easy, but possible. You can act against the pattern, not because it feels right, but because you see what it is. And this is the part most people avoid, because it removes the comfort of unconsciousness. You don't get to hide behind, this is just who I am. You see that it isn't. It's what you've been repeating. And now, there's a quiet tension between what feels natural and what is actually chosen. And the more you stay in that tension, without escaping it, the more something begins to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, your actions stop aligning with what is comfortable and start aligning with what is conscious. And this is as close as it gets to real agency. Not perfect control, not total freedom, but the ability to see the pattern and not automatically become it. And in that space, small as it is, your life begins to change. Not because you've gained control over everything, but because you're no longer completely controlled by what you don't see. So now you see it, not as an idea, but as something happening inside you. The thought appears. The impulse moves. The feeling rises. And for the first time, you don't immediately call it you. You just notice it. And something about that is unsettling, because the certainty you once had, I am choosing my life, no longer feels as solid. It feels thinner, more fragile, but also more honest. Because now you can see what was always there, the patterns, the conditioning, the quiet forces, shaping your behavior in the background, and you realize you were never fully in control, but you were never completely powerless either. You were just unaware. And awareness doesn't give you freedom in the way you expected. It doesn't remove resistance. It doesn't silence the patterns. It doesn't make decisions easy. What it does is change your relationship to them. You no longer move blindly. You no longer confuse impulse with intention. You no longer build your identity on automatic reactions. Instead, you watch. You feel, you recognize, and in certain moments, you interrupt. Not always, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to see that something in you is not the pattern. Something quieter. Something that doesn't rush. Something that doesn't react. And it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't claim control. It just observes. And maybe that's the part you've been mistaking all along. Not the thinker, not the voice, not the impulse, but the awareness that notices them. Because that part doesn't choose in the way you thought. It doesn't force outcomes. It doesn't control everything, but it sees. And sometimes, seeing is enough to change what happens next. So the question isn't, do you have free will? The question is, when the next thought appears, When the next impulse moves, when the next pattern begins, will you recognize it as it happens? Or will you call it you and follow it again without ever noticing where it came from?